Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. In May 2023, Spanish police received a distressing call from a quiet neighborhood in Malaga. In one of the apartments, they discovered the body of a young woman with multiple stab wounds. The suspect fled the scene but was apprehended hours later at a local cafe. However, this tragedy was only the beginning of a series of events that led investigators to an unsolved case from 9 years prior. Behind the wall of another apartment, they found something that shocked even the most experienced forensic experts. In 2011, Sibora Gagani lived with her boyfriend Marco in Spain, in the Laurel neighborhood near the beaches of Torremolinos. On the surface, their life seemed stable. Sibora worked as a waitress in a local restaurant while Marco worked as a chef. They rented a small house, and Sibora often called her mother, Elisabetta, assuring her that everything was fine. However, behind this appearance of stability lay serious problems that became more evident with each passing month. When Elisabetta came to Spain to visit her daughter, she immediately noticed the tense atmosphere in the home. Arguments between Sibora and Marco broke out even in her presence. Elisabetta saw how her daughter tried to justify Marco's bursts of jealousy and tension, blaming them on temporary difficulties. However, Elisabetta was convinced that the problems went far beyond day-to-day struggles. It was hard to believe that just 2 years earlier, Sibora had been a completely different person. Born on September 14, 1991, in Tirana, Albania, she was known from a young age for her lively and cheerful personality. After her parents divorced, her mother, Elisabetta, moved with her children to Italy, where they started a new life. In Rome, Sibora quickly became popular with those around her. Her classmates gave her the nickname Tsibi, highlighting her energy and friendliness. Despite financial challenges, Sibora was eager to support her family from a young age. She started working as a waitress in a local cafe, but never gave up on her dreams. Her natural beauty, slim figure, and success in a regional beauty contest opened the door to opportunities in the modeling world. Despite this, her biggest dream was to become a teacher, as Sibora genuinely loved working with children. Things began to change when Sibora turned 18. At a cafe, she met Marco, a 31-year-old man whose charm and confidence immediately caught her attention. At the time, she knew little about him. He was divorced, had a sister, and seemed to want to start a new chapter in life. However, behind this facade lay a complicated past. Marco was known for his aggressive behavior and problems with controlled substances, which had brought him to the attention of the police on multiple occasions. Sibora, captivated by his charisma, chose to overlook these warning signs. A year into their relationship, Marco suggested that Sibora move with him to Spain, claiming there were better job opportunities there than in Italy. Elisabetta tried to dissuade her daughter, doubting Marco's intentions, but Sibora insisted. She believed this move would mark the beginning of a new chapter where she and Marco could build a happy life together. At first, things in Spain seemed promising. Sibora quickly found work as a waitress, and Marco got a job as a pizza chef. They rented a cozy home, and Sibora shared her plans with her mother, sounding optimistic about the future. However, their stability was short-lived. Marco began losing one job after another, blaming his employers for his failures. His irritability and jealousy grew more pronounced, and his aggressive behavior escalated from minor incidents into serious conflicts. When Elisabetta traveled to Spain to see how her daughter was doing, she was shocked by what she found. Sibora, once lively and confident, now seemed withdrawn and subdued. Marco didn't even try to hide his irritation in Elisabetta's presence. Their arguments grew louder, but despite the clear issues, Sibora continued to defend Marco, assuring her mother that things would improve. Why Sibora chose to overlook these red flags puzzled those close to her. Perhaps she sought in Marco the support and stability she had lacked in her early years. Her family, having moved from Albania to Italy, had endured tough times. Elisabetta worked tirelessly to provide a better life for her children, but Sibora faced the need to shoulder responsibility at an early age. Her relationship with Marco might have been an attempt to fill that void, but instead, it only brought more strain. Life in Spain was increasingly becoming a struggle for Sibora, as the bright dreams of her youth gradually faded into distant memories. In July 2014, Sabora Gagani disappeared suddenly, leaving her family in anguish. The last known contact she had was a text message to Marco, her former partner, on July 7th. After that, her phone was turned off and her social media accounts went silent. This behavior was uncharacteristic of her. Prior to that, Sabora had informed her mother that she had finally ended things with Marco, moved into a new apartment, and felt liberated. She described it as feeling like a butterfly that had just emerged from its cocoon. But her sudden silence alarmed everyone. The situation took an even stranger turn when Marco unexpectedly appeared at Elisabetta's home in Italy. He tried to present himself as a concerned and regretful man, pretending to care deeply about what had happened. Over coffee, he told Elisabetta that he had no idea where Sabora could have gone. According to Marco, they had argued shortly before she vanished, and she had walked out, leaving all her belongings behind. Later, Marco changed his story, claiming that a security guard at their apartment complex had supposedly seen Sabora leaving with 2 suitcases. These conflicting statements only deepened suspicions and heightened concerns. Elisabetta recalled that just a month prior, Sabora had shared her decision to end the relationship for good. After 3 years of trying to salvage it, she had moved out of Marco's apartment and was working on rebuilding her life. During that time, she tried to distance herself from him, but it seemed this did little to stop his interest in her life. Marco continued to involve himself, showing an unsettling persistence. In early July, he unexpectedly called Elisabetta, asking if Sabora had returned to Italy. The question struck Elisabetta as odd, especially given their recent breakup. Sabora had made multiple attempts to cut ties with Marco. In 2013, she even returned to her mother's home in Italy, determined to leave everything behind. During that time, she admitted she no longer saw a future in their relationship. But Marco refused to let go. He showed up at their house in Italy, pleading with Sabora and promising to change. He even proposed to her. Worn out from the constant struggle, Sabora gave in to his promises. But the cycle soon resumed. Jealousy, control, and aggressive behavior began to destroy her sense of peace once again. At one point, she confided in her mother that if she ever decided to leave Marco for good, she might have to completely disappear, as she believed he wouldn't leave her alone. Over the following months, Sabora traveled frequently to Italy, likely because her Spanish residency permit had expired. There were reports suggesting she used a forged Italian ID for her travels. Elisabetta noticed her daughter seemed increasingly frightened, but Sabora rarely shared details. She only mentioned that she was searching for a way out of her difficult situation. By June 2014, Sabora had moved into a new apartment, trying to start fresh. She told her mother she had no intention of ever returning to Marco. For a short time, she seemed to regain a sense of freedom, but concerns about her safety lingered. When Marco claimed that she had left and abandoned all her belongings, her family immediately knew something was wrong. Sabora would never have severed contact with her family, especially not with her mother and brothers. Now the family could only wait, hoping that Sabora had indeed decided to go into hiding to escape Marco's control. Yet the conflicting accounts and complete lack of communication from her only raised more questions. By 2015, the investigation into Sabora Gagani's disappearance had made no significant progress despite the efforts of her family and law enforcement. Elisabetta, her mother, had been the driving force behind filing an official report with the authorities. She remained convinced that Marco, Sabora's former partner, was somehow involved, as he was the last known person to have seen her before she vanished. However, his behavior throughout the investigation only raised more suspicions. During questioning, Marco repeated his version of events. He claimed that Sabora had left their home after an argument, taking only a few belongings. However, many of her personal items, including clothing and identification documents, were still in the apartment, which seemed unusual. Despite his claims, Marco never reported her disappearance to the police. Instead, he insisted he tried to locate Sabora on his own, printing and distributing flyers around their neighborhood. He also offered conflicting theories about her whereabouts, suggesting at one point that she might have traveled to Argentina or that she had been seen with an unknown man with whom she supposedly had a confrontation. These statements lacked consistency and factual support. Elisabetta, distrustful of Marco, began her own efforts to find her daughter. She reached out to the media and a specialized organization that helps publicize cases of missing persons. Photos of Sibora and calls for assistance began appearing in both Italian and Spanish news outlets. Despite these efforts, no new leads were uncovered. While Sibora's family continued their search for answers, Marco appeared to lead a relatively ordinary life. He changed his appearance by shaving his head and growing a beard, seemingly trying to avoid attracting attention. During this time, he entered new relationships, but both ended with complaints from the women about his aggressive behavior. Still, Marco remained in Spain, frequently visiting the gym and joining a shooting club, which alarmed those aware of his history. Sibora's family refused to give up. Elisabetta repeatedly appealed to the police, urging them to intensify their investigation. Meanwhile, law enforcement began reviewing the case files, searching for any overlooked details. They scrutinized Marco's statements, which had appeared inconsistent from the beginning. His claim that Sibora left with suitcases conflicted with his assertion that she had walked out with nothing. Additionally, questions arose about why he had not contacted the police immediately after her disappearance. Over time, public interest in Sibora's case began to fade, despite her family's persistent efforts. Marco, still living in Spain, seemed to adjust to life following her disappearance. To his neighbors, he appeared to be a friendly individual who was focused on fitness and socializing. However, his past relationship with Sibora and the complaints from new partners continued to cast doubt on his character. As Sibora's family clung to hope for any news, the investigation remained at a standstill. Authorities expanded their efforts, utilizing international missing persons databases, but these measures yielded no results. For those closest to Sibora, the uncertainty surrounding her fate remained an unbearable ordeal. By 2023, Marco appeared to have turned his life around on the surface. He was living with a new partner named Paula, and they had a child together. However, beneath the facade of this seemingly fresh start were the same issues that had plagued Marco for years. His relationship with Paula was far from stable. She confided to close friends and co-workers that she experienced physical mistreatment from Marco. Meanwhile, Marco struggled to keep a steady job, which only worsened their financial troubles. While working at a pizzeria, Marco met Victor Molina, the restaurant owner, who eventually offered jobs to both him and Paula. Victor also rented the couple a small apartment, hoping to ease their financial difficulties. Unlike Marco, Paula quickly earned trust and respect at work. Victor and his sister Victoria, who also worked at the restaurant, became not only Paula's employers, but also a source of emotional support. Over time, Victoria learned more about the difficulties in Paula and Marco's relationship. After one particular incident, she began urging Paula to contact the police. According to Victoria, Marco was not only aggressive at work, but also provided no help at home. An incident at the restaurant marked a breaking point for Victor. The door to the staff restroom was found broken. Victoria learned from Paula that Marco had damaged it, accusing her of using the space to meet with co-workers. Following this, Victor reassigned Marco to a different location, keeping him under close supervision. Despite Paula's hard work and efforts to maintain the appearance of a normal life, she couldn't hide the challenges she faced. Her growing trust in Victoria allowed her to open up more. Paula revealed that she was staying with Marco only because it was the only way she could regain custody of her children, who had been removed from her care after authorities discovered prohibited substances in their home. The substances belonged to Marco, but the consequences had fallen on the entire family. For Paula, this was a deeply personal tragedy, and her primary goal was to save enough money to leave Marco and fight to regain custody. Meanwhile, Marco's situation continued to deteriorate. He frequently complained to Victor about his financial struggles, claiming he was only working for the sake of his family, yet his actions and behavior told a different story. His aggression at work and inability to get along with coworkers led Victor to question whether keeping him employed was worth the trouble. At the same time, Victoria, seeing how dire Paula's situation was, continued to encourage her not to tolerate the mistreatment. However, Paula, fearing for her safety, avoided taking any confrontational steps. She admitted to Victoria that Marco had once struck her 4 times and kicked her, but she downplayed the seriousness of the incident. For Victoria and Victor, this was clear evidence that Paula's situation required urgent intervention. On Tuesday, May 16, 2023, Paula spent her day off in good spirits, sharing her plans for a relaxing and productive evening with her coworkers. She seemed optimistic and ready to unwind. The following day, May 17th, Victoria, Paula's coworker and close friend, was eager to hear about how her evening had gone. However, the day took a dark and unexpected turn. That morning, at around 11:30 a.m., loud shouting erupted from the apartment Paula shared with Marco. Though arguments between them were common, this time it sounded far more intense. Paula's voice was unmistakable, calling out for help. The commotion was so loud that Victor, Paula's landlord and employer, who happened to be nearby, could hear it clearly. Alarmed, he rushed toward the apartment with another employee from the restaurant. When they reached the door, the 2 men began knocking and shouting, trying to understand what was happening. From inside, they heard faint sobbing, which soon fell silent. Moments later, Marco opened the door. His demeanor was calm as he assured them everything was fine, claiming Paula had simply gone to bed to rest. However, Paula's voice was no longer audible, which deeply unsettled Victor. The situation was made even more concerning by recent events. Just a few days earlier, Victor had fired Marco from the restaurant following a series of troubling incidents, including the unexplained disappearance of a kitchen knife. Victor had grown increasingly distrustful of Marco and wanted to avoid further problems. Now, Marco found himself at the center of yet another alarming event. Victor left to retrieve a spare key to the apartment, while the other employee called the police. Marco, seemingly aware that the situation was escalating, remained calm, but acted unexpectedly. Without any explanation, he left the apartment and walked out of the building. When the police arrived, they found the apartment locked. Everything inside appeared as though the occupants had recently left, adding to the growing mystery. Meanwhile, Victor returned with the spare key and entered the apartment to determine what had happened. Inside one of the rooms, they discovered Paula's body lying on the floor with multiple stab wounds. Her clothes were soaked in blood, and it was evident that she had passed away several hours earlier. The police immediately secured the scene, called in forensic specialists to collect evidence, and launched a search for Marco, who had fled by that time. Paula's body was sent for an autopsy to confirm the exact cause of death, while investigators worked to track down the suspect. Marco was located just a few hours later, sitting calmly at a table in a local cafe. He showed no resistance during his arrest and behaved as though nothing had happened. On May 20th, 2023, 3 days after Paula's tragic death, Marco appeared in court. He was charged with committing a crime with aggravating circumstances related to gender-based aggression. The court also ordered a psychiatric evaluation and testing for controlled substances. Marco was denied bail and remained in custody. During the hearing, Marco exercised his right to remain silent, speaking only to answer questions from his attorney. There was no mention of Sabora Gagani, whose disappearance he had previously alluded to. However, just days after his arrest, Sabora's name came back into the spotlight. On May 17th, the day of Paula's death, while being interrogated at the station, Marco made an unexpected confession. He claimed that during an argument in 2014, he had killed Sabora Gagani and hidden her body in the apartment they shared. Marco even offered to show investigators the exact location of her remains. Despite his confession, law enforcement chose to prioritize the investigation into Paula's death and temporarily delayed verifying Marco's statements about Sabora. For Sabora's mother, Elisabetta, the news of Marco's arrest and his admission regarding her daughter was a devastating blow. For 9 years, she had fought to reopen the investigation, believing Marco was involved in Sabora's disappearance. Following Marco's confession, the case of Sabora Gagani was officially reopened, and investigators began working to verify his claims, starting with an examination of the apartment where the couple had lived in 2014. By early June 2023, Spanish investigators focusing on Sabora's case conducted a detailed review of the building's layout where she and Marco had once resided. A thorough search of the apartment yielded no significant findings. However, discrepancies were found between the apartment's physical layout and its blueprints. This discovery shifted the investigators' attention to a neighboring unit on the same floor, which was nearly identical in design. One particular detail stood out. There was a large space that, according to the building plans, should have been part of the bedroom in the apartment under investigation, but it was not present in reality. After obtaining permission, investigators entered the neighboring apartment on June 6th and broke through the wall. Behind it, they discovered a large wooden box filled with lime. Inside the box, police uncovered the first set of evidence: a plastic bag containing a knife stained with dried blood and personal items believed to belong to Sabora. Among the items was a bouquet of wilted flowers lying atop several plastic bags. Inside one of the bags was a camping sleeping bag which contained human remains. The remains were sent for forensic analysis to determine the identity and cause of death. Investigators noted tattoos on the body that matched descriptions provided in the missing persons report for Sabora Gagani. However, to confirm the identity conclusively, Spanish authorities requested DNA samples from Sabora's family in Italy. On June 10th, police arrived at the home of Sabora's mother, Elisabetta, to collect a saliva sample. The DNA results confirmed the remains belonged to Sabora Gagani. In the week following the discovery, new details about Marco's actions emerged in Spain. During interrogations, he claimed to have used acid in an attempt to dispose of the body, though this claim was not substantiated. Investigators noted Marco frequently altered his statements. His confessions following his arrest for Paula's death had prompted the reopening of Sabora's case. Meanwhile, authorities continued to investigate the circumstances surrounding her death. For Elisabetta, the confirmation of Sabora's remains was a devastating blow. 9 years of uncertainty had stripped her of hope, though she had never stopped waiting for answers about her daughter's fate. Over the years, her life had changed dramatically. Sabora's father had passed away from illness, never learning the truth about his daughter, and Elisabetta had found solace only in the birth of her grandson. When the remains were officially identified, Elisabetta reflected on her years of advocacy, repeatedly appealing to the police to reopen her daughter's case. While her efforts had finally brought answers, they also delivered a bittersweet sense of closure. Forensic experts continued to analyze the evidence recovered from the site where Sabora's remains were found. The knife discovered in the plastic bag was sent for forensic testing to identify biological traces that might link it to Marco. Meanwhile, Spanish investigators collaborated with their Italian counterparts to supplement the case materials from Sabora's disappearance. The investigation into Paula's death also remained ongoing, with Marco already the primary suspect. Despite the evidence and Marco's own admission of his involvement in Sabora's death, including revealing the location of her remains, he later retracted his confession. His attorney argued that Marco's statements had been made under duress and should not be admissible in court. However, investigators maintained that the evidence found in the concealed box, including Sabora's personal belongings, provided strong grounds for further charges. In January 2024, several months after the discovery of Sabora Gagani's remains, her family was finally able to lay her to rest. After all forensic examinations were completed, her remains were returned to her loved ones for burial. The ceremony took place in Italy, where friends and family gathered to say their final goodbyes. As a tribute, balloons were released into the sky with heartfelt messages, symbolizing hope and farewell. At the time, most attention was focused on the ongoing legal proceedings against Marco, who faced charges related to Paula's death. During a hearing on January 30th, 2024, Marco submitted a handwritten 17-page letter in which he admitted responsibility for her death, but included numerous caveats. He claimed that the conflict arose due to accumulated arguments over a €50 debt and his infidelity. According to Marco, during the altercation, he defended himself too strongly, which led to the tragedy. However, investigators determined that the wounds on Paula's body were located on her back, casting serious doubt on his self-defense claim. Despite his admissions regarding Paula, Marco refused to provide detailed information about Sabora's case. He did confirm that he had wrapped her body in plastic, placed it in a wooden box, covered it with flowers, layered it with lime, and sealed it within a wall. However, he denied being responsible for her death, attempting to justify his actions as a reaction to fear of the circumstances. During the trial, Marco abruptly changed his account of Cibora's death, presenting an entirely new version of events. He alleged that the Albanian mafia, which he claimed to have been connected to due to debts, was responsible for her death. According to Marco, he had borrowed 25,000 euros to open a brothel, but the money was stolen. Unable to repay the debt, he said that 4 men came to his home, and during an argument, one of them killed Cibora. Marco claimed he was then forced, under threat to his own life, to dispose of her body to avoid further consequences. This version of events raised significant doubts among investigators, as Marco had previously changed his statements multiple times. Throughout the investigation, it became evident that Marco had used falsehoods to mislead authorities, beginning with his arrest in May 2023 after Paula's death. His claims of mafia involvement were not supported by any evidence gathered during the investigation. The cause of Cibora's death was determined through an autopsy. Multiple stab wounds, which, despite the condition of her remains, clearly indicated a violent crime. Cibora's family finally received confirmation of her fate years after she had been reported missing. Elisabetta, her mother, revealed that she had lived the past 9 years clinging to hope for answers, though Cibora's father had passed away without ever learning the truth. By May 2024, the trial for Paula's case was ongoing. The court decided to proceed with a jury trial to address charges of domestic aggression and homicide. Meanwhile, Cibora Gagani's case, though reopened, had not yet gone to trial. Investigators continued to scrutinize Marco's claims, including his allegations of mafia involvement. Further court proceedings were anticipated. The stories of Cibora Gagani and Paula highlight how destructive relationships, marked by manipulation and abusive behavior, can have devastating consequences. Cibora, who had dreamed of a bright future, and Paula, who was striving to reclaim control of her life, both fell victim to the same person. Their fates serve as a somber reminder of the importance of recognizing the signs of abusive behavior early and intervening to prevent further tragedies. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.